Hi everyone. As you've heard, my name is Kendall Moran. I am an army nurse working in the emergency department in Portsmouth. I'll be hosting this evening's Nursing and Pandemic Newly Registered Nurses with the wonderful Jess Sainsbury, my partner in crime. Jess, do you want to introduce yourself briefly?
Lovely, thanks Kendall. Hi everyone, my name's Jess Sainsbury. I am also an early career nurse. I am currently working at the Florence Nightingale Foundation as a research and policy assistant, and I'm loving being co-lead alongside Kendall on the Newly Registered Nurses Network. Really looking forward to tonight.
Jess. I should probably mention that I am on holiday in the Outer Hebrides, hence being in a slightly different setup to what you would expect one to be in when hosting a webinar. But I hope the internet connection works out well. So we are going to be interviewing two interviewees today, Kate and Daniel. We had a third lined up, Lily Walday, and unfortunately she's poorly, so we're sending her the very best wishes, and hopefully if there'll be a next time she can get involved in the next thing. Kate, would you be able to briefly introduce yourself, please?
Hi, thank you. My name's Kayte Powell. I am a critical care nurse working in intensive care in North Wales.
Thanks, Kate. Welcome. And Daniel, how about you?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I'm Daniel Branch. I'm a learning disability nurse working in the community for an intensive support team for Lancashire and South Cumbria NHS.
Great, thanks, Daniel. So all of us are involved in the RCN's Newly Registered Nurses Network that was launched last year. We aim to enhance the voice of new registrants, both within the college and the wider voice of nursing, and provide peer support. So we're really happy to be running this event tonight because we're really keen to have captured people's experiences of joining the register at this really difficult time, and to really delve into what that was like for a few of us, and see if there are similarities between the stories we hear tonight and others around the country, and those tuning in hopefully. So tonight Jess is going to start by interviewing Kate, and then I am going to interview Daniel. We welcome any questions throughout, as you've heard, so do pop them in the chat or get in touch with those, and we will tackle the questions at the end. I think I'm going to hand over to Jess now for the start of the questions.
Thanks, Kendall. Kate, are you ready for this?
I think so.
You've totally got this. Okay, so we'll start off, Kate. What is your very first memory of COVID? How did you hear about it, and when did you even realise it was a pandemic?
So when COVID first happened, at the beginning of my nursing career, I was working on an acute medical ward, and I was very newly registered. And I think, like everybody else, I think I first heard about it on the news as something happening quite far away. And then just slowly it seemed to filter in, like all of a sudden you'd hear a new policy or you'd hear a new infection prevention guideline. And then, to be honest, it very gradually happened for me. And then all of a sudden, when you look back, you think, I couldn't pinpoint an exact moment. I just remember it not being around, and now it's around, and now it just hit like a tornado. We call it a tornado. We'll call it a tornado.
You can call it a tornado. And was it more of a kind of a work awareness, or with your friends and family, or maybe a bit of both?
I think it was a mixture of both. I think the first time I heard about it, I would say it was in a social setting, because I was sitting watching the news like everybody else, and then it became much more of a work focused thing. So again, it was about the new policies, the new guidelines, changing of practice, and when you're newly registered, everything's new to you anyway, but all of a sudden you're learning alongside everybody else. So you're looking to others for guidance, but actually it was new to everybody. So I think that threw everybody, if I'm honest.
Absolutely. Sorry for going off script. This is a problem when Jess is asking the questions. Okay, so Kate, what was your role within the COVID response? What were you doing at the start?
At the very start, as I say, I was on an acute medical ward, so we were seeing people that came through straight from A&E. So everybody was potentially COVID. So it was quite scary in that sense, because we were starting to swab people, and at the beginning you're looking for a certain set of symptoms, and as it went on, the symptoms grew larger, and people that were asymptomatic were suddenly coming back. So I think it was a huge learning curve. And then for the second wave is when I moved to my role on intensive care, and that was a completely different ball game. So by the time wave 2 hit, I was on intensive care, and I was looking after the sickest people and on ventilators and multi-organ support, and just dealing with a lot more death, really, and on a scale that I've never seen before. Not only as a newly registered nurse, but what you could soak in was that nobody had seen anything like this before, because the nurses who'd worked there longer, who again you do look to for support, they were struggling as well, because nobody had seen anything on this scale before, and everything was a new way of working. And looking after that level of patient on multi-organ support as a newly registered nurse, with the staffing levels all changed, it was incredibly scary. And I think the overwhelming feeling when I look back is at the time it was fear.
Thanks, Kate, and thank you so much for sharing that. It can't be easy, reflecting on what it was you were experiencing at the time, and your colleagues. And obviously don't answer questions that you're not comfortable with as well. We're a team, and as much as we want to hear about it, we want to make sure you're okay. And you've mentioned about fear and your colleagues struggling as well, even the more experienced ones that you looked up to. But what were you and your colleagues feeling at the time? Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so I think it's difficult at the time when it was there was a high level of patients coming in that needed intensive care. We were trying to create space. We were conscious that we had surge staff come in. So we had nurses that had never worked in intensive care before, had never seen a ventilated patient before. I mean, God bless them, coming in to offer their help. So we were trying to support them, and we were trying to support each other. And it was just about getting through each shift. It wasn't, I don't think any of us could think long term, because there didn't seem to be an end to it. And I know that sounds incredibly depressing now, but I think at the time it was so overwhelming that that's all you could focus on, was just getting through that shift, putting that PPE on, and dealing with the grief, really, and other people's relatives. It was all new, the way we were communicating with families, and FaceTiming, and through like 3 levels of plastic. And I think trying to support each other, and then just you'd have to go home and just try and switch off, because obviously you don't want to take that home to your family. And I just remember coming home, the drive home was my switch off. So I would always sit on the drive outside my house, have a little cry, listen to 2 songs on the radio, and then go in. And that was my little routine. And I think a lot of us shared a routine that got us through. Like, I go home, I do this, and then I switch off, and then I do this, and I come in. And it was literally, there was no long-term plan to it for us. It was just, let's just get through this shift, come on. And I think there was a lot of group hugs going on, and just it was about support, because you realize if I'm struggling, then a nurse who's never worked in this environment before, who has offered their help, needs my support. And then it was just all about recognizing that everybody was struggling. And I think the time to deal with that is now, which is what we're finding, that long term it did affect us, but at the time we couldn't think about it. It was just you had to just deal with these incredibly sick patients, and it was fear, anxiety, the unknown, and just overwhelming grief, really. That I don't know that anybody's hardwired to deal with that level of death, but we found a way. And I think teamwork is what shone through for everybody that got through it. I think they said it's the team that made it. It made the team stronger.
Yeah. Oh, you're all amazing. Oh my goodness. And that coping mechanism of, you know, sitting on the drive, listening to a couple of songs and having that further separation before you walk through the door. That's a really good method. Thank you. So Kate, when did you realise that COVID risks were higher for certain groups? So for example, we all know by now the risks for our colleagues and the population who are from a BAME community, and what impact do you think these inequalities have?
I think it just became apparent when the people we were treating. So I think, it is indiscriminate as a disease anyway. There was a lot of different people, but certainly the types of patients that we were seeing, you could see certain characteristics, in people that were getting sicker. And certainly we had some of our own work colleagues become patients with us. And then, like you say, there were certain, ethnic groups and that you saw had a different trajectory to everybody else. So it was just apparent in the patients that you were treating. And then again, it was publicised, so you could see it everywhere, and it was just there in front of you. You couldn't deny it. The people that you were treating, you could see, who it was affecting more. There was, everybody was affected, but you could see the groups that were affected more. And I think it did highlight that there are inequalities, and something needed to be done about that.
Thank you, Kate. And were there discussions in practice at the time when this was happening, or was it just, over time it was recognised? Can you remember?
I think we certainly discussed it. As I say, we had work colleagues from, we've got a very mixed group of us from all over the world, and certainly some of them ended up as patients with us, and they talk about, there's a fear for us because it seems to affect our group more, and a lot of their families were getting a lot sicker than any of, my family, for instance, who might have caught COVID. And it's quite difficult to hear your work colleagues say that they are scared, and then when they become patients with you yourself, it's incredibly scary for them and for you. And I think that's the conversation that we had, like, wow, this is a real difference here. Inequality, I suppose, is the right word.
Thank you for sharing those reflections, Kate. So you have already spoken a little bit about support, that within your team, you supported each other in that way, but can you tell me about what forms of support were put in place perhaps by the organisation, or other areas or methods of support that you accessed?
Yeah, so I certainly used friends at the time. I'd say just to vent to, really. I think as part of work, we have a psychologist on the ward, and she was there throughout the pandemic, and she is still there now, dealing with a lot of difficulties we're struggling with now as well. She's still really supporting us, and I can't praise her enough. And also, we've got a follow-up team in work, follow-up and bereavement, which I've become part of, and we follow up every patient that's been on intensive care for any reason, and we offer them support with psychological support after they've been on intensive care, and a bereavement service. And actually, they've been supporting staff as well. So we've had sessions where we've just sat around and talked as a group, and that's nurses, doctors, physios, healthcare assistants, domestics, everybody that was around at that time has come and shared, reflected. And at certain times, I will say, I'm sure they won't mind me saying, there's been a lot of tears, and people that were off sick at the time, people that are off sick now. It's all about sharing the experiences and realizing it's okay that you're struggling with that, because like I think I said before, nobody is hardwired to deal with that level of grief and death. And no, none of us have been through that before. It's a pandemic, and I don't think anybody's got experience of that I know of. And as in, you know, I was relatively newly registered as well. I think we can all relate to it just being overwhelming, really. So we've had the psychological support afterwards, which I think is going to be a long-term ongoing thing. Family and friends have certainly got me through, and I think as well as a lot of online resources. So like RCN, I know that you've done a lot of webinars and support, and there's just a lot of research on there that you can look at, and it's just nice to go, yeah, do you know what, other people are struggling as well, so I feel okay. So just using the support that's out there, I think, has helped.
Yeah, that sense of connection with others is so important, you know, pandemic aside. Even as a, you know, early career nurse, having that network and opportunity to speak to other people at a similar stage in their careers as you, it's so important, isn't it? Thank you, Kate.
Thank you.
The next question I'd like to ask you, what kept you up at night?
Okay, I will try my best here. A lot of things, really. At the time, it was people's faces. There was a lot of last conversations that you had via FaceTime, holding people's hands and reassuring them they were going to be all right when you weren't really sure. I think it was a lot of that, really, anxiety around that, and guilt, I think, because you tell people, yeah, you're going to be fine, I'm going to do everything, we're going to do everything we can, and then when they, you know, when people die, you feel like, oh, I told you you're going to be all right, and you're not. And I think that kept me awake quite a lot. Sorry, that's a bit of a sad story. I'm struggling a little bit there.
No, thank you so much for feeling that you're able to share that, because I think a lot of other people probably were in a similar situation as well, and hearing that from you will probably help them. So thank you for sharing. So Kate, oh my goodness, how am I on the last question already?
Where's that gone?
So looking back, can you share, you've shared a lot, so we really appreciate this, Kate. Can you share your key reflections? So, you know, anything that went well. So I know you've spoken about the teamwork that you've had and the support networks as well, perhaps more on that. But also, what do you think could have been done differently?
I think an overall reflection is that you're only as strong as the team around you, and that just reaching out and making those connections and supporting each other and recognizing different strengths in people and recognizing when people are struggling and being able to support them through that is the, you know, my overwhelming feeling of it is how important teamwork is. Support networks, I would, you know, worth their weight in gold in whatever form they come in, online, group sessions, whether it's, you know, whether you just text in a little group of people, reach out and make that connection with people. Don't be afraid to admit that you're struggling for whatever reason. Like you said before, pandemic aside, if you're struggling with something, say it, tell somebody, because you won't be the first person to have struggled with something. I think what could have we done differently? I don't know, because I think it was the first time that we'd come across it. So first, you know, there was a lot of research that happened. So by the time the second wave, and you know, now we're treating COVID patients as well, we've got into a rhythm. We know what these patients look like. We know, when I say look like, I mean, you know, the disease trajectory. We sort of are aware, okay, this is going to happen. I think that patient needs this, and we know from research that this medication works, and anxiety, you know, their anxiety is at a high, so we're trying to keep everybody calm. And I think the research that has happened behind the scenes, just trust the science, really, because it's helped us in treating people, and we are now at a stage where we can offer a lot more medication support treatment for people that are going through this. So it's, you know, it's made everybody feel stronger in that we sort of know a little bit more about it now. So trust the science.
Thank you so much, Kate. Oh my goodness. I just want to reach through the screen and give you a huge cuddle, honestly. I mean, I know we know each other through the network, but you are absolutely incredible. And thank you so much for everything you've done and continue to do, not only for nursing, for the populations we serve, but also for early career nurses, and how, you know, you effortlessly support others. We really do appreciate you. So thank you.
Well, coming from you, who is an absolute living legend, I mean, you do so much for everybody. So thank you.
Love it. So I am going to pass back to Kendall, who's going to ask Daniel some questions as well. But if I can remind our lovely audience, if there are any questions that you would like to ask us as early career nurses, we will have time to answer those at the end. So please do use the chat function. And yeah, over to you, Kendall.
Thanks, guys. That was really amazing. Kate, that was really beautiful. Thank you so much. The strength of nurses amazes me every day, and it's really wonderful. So Daniel, are you ready?
Ooh, I am, yeah, quite the act to follow, but we'll see what we can do.
I know, it's okay, no pressure. I'm really I think it's going to be really interesting to see the differences in your stories, because obviously you work in very different environments, so yeah, that'll be really interesting. So the questions are very similar. So what is your first memory of COVID, and how did you hear about it? Was it kind of gradual, or all of a sudden this horrible disease was in your midst? Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so I think similar to Kate, and probably for a lot of people, I think my first inklings of it were via the news. But I think initially I maybe didn't worry that it was necessarily going to affect me. I'm old enough to remember that we've had bird flu and swine flu and a few different things that have been very damaging for people in different countries, unfortunately, but thankfully haven't actually had that much of an impact on us, despite the fact that the news and scientists initially thought that was possible. And then I think, so that was probably the start of last year, wasn't it? And then I think kind of getting into, I can't put a precise date on it, but kind of the end of February, start of March, I had to go to a conference in Birmingham and a couple of meetings in London. And I live in quite a small village, so I wouldn't necessarily see the impact initially, but I was quite conscious, thinking that there were a lot more people, early adopters, I guess, kind of wearing masks and stuff like that when I was in the bigger city areas. And I think that probably got me slightly more thoughtful about that. And then I've had kind of different hats at different points of the pandemic. So right at the start of the pandemic, I was still a student, and then it did start to get mentioned in university as to that there might be an impact. And yeah, so then obviously it became headline news every day, didn't it? So probably quite gradual, really.
Yeah, it's really strange to think back to those times where you started to see masks in public. Yeah. It seems it's an everyday occurrence now, isn't it? It's really strange to think that that wasn't a thing once.
No.
Yeah, so quite similar to Kate, really.
Yeah.
So next question, what was your role within the COVID response?
So I've had a few different hats, really. So initially at the start of last year, so the start of the pandemic, I was still a student. So initially, right at the start, I didn't really have a role. I was still finishing my last essay, but then towards the start of the pandemic, we had to make the decision about what we were doing with our management placement. So I eventually ended up opting in to do my management placement, which meant I was doing a paid role working for an assessment and treatment unit, the local hospital to me, which essentially is a specialist mental health ward for people with learning disabilities. So I was a student nurse then, so it was kind of helping with all the different things that you'd imagine you would do as a student nurse, from medications, looking after people's paperwork. And then as we moved on, I was lucky enough to qualify, and then I've been working in the community. So again, that was quite different, because that's involved going out to people's houses, which presents its own challenges in terms of having the right PPE. Obviously, you quite a lot less certainty as to how cautious people are necessarily being and stuff like that. So it's been different roles at different points during the pandemic, but kind of similar things, always working with people with learning disabilities, really.
Interesting. So I guess the next question, what were you and your colleagues feeling at the time? I guess that's in two different parts, correct? Student time and your qualified time.
So I think from a student point of view, initially there was quite a lot of fear and uncertainty. Some of it maybe slightly selfish in terms of we weren't sure whether it was going to affect our ability to finish our degree, because there was a lot of talk about what was going to happen with that, with the practicalities of that. We ended up having to take contracts to get insurance, so there were a few complications with that. And then the apprehension on kind of opting in, that kind of there was we weren't quite sure what we were going to be doing. And I can still remember that Matt Hancock was doing one of the news things, and it's like, oh, and we're going to get all the students to come and work in the COVID response. We're like, and a few of us sitting there going, oh, that's interesting. Okay. And then that was followed up by that evening, we then had an email from the university that by the next morning we had to make a decision about what we wanted to do. So that was quite scary. And I think kind of, not to be overly dramatic, but you do kind of think about, oh, I'm actually putting my life at risk potentially. That's not something that you think about a lot at the time. So that was an interesting one. And it was quite an interesting one. I used to like talking to my grandparents a lot, who were in the Second World War, and they were talking about all that sort of thing. It was quite, I've not, got any kind of background like that, but it was interesting to suddenly think, oh, I'm opting to put my life at risk. That's an interesting thing. And then I think once we'd started, it was just like Kate said, it was a lot of kind of teamwork stuff, and you were kind of in the moment. So you were probably thinking less about it and just trying to think about doing as well as you could for people. And then similar in my new job, there was a new team, so we kind of had the initial excitement and anxiety about starting a new team, and then similar, trying to some scary moments for people, but also trying to do the best for people. So quite a range of things, really.
Yeah, lots of really interesting reflections there, particularly about the Second World War. I've been in the military for a long time, and my military colleagues and I often draw parallels between what healthcare workers have put themselves through in the last 18 months, for sure. You mentioned PPE briefly. Was that a difficult issue when you were working in the community?
I think I was quite fortunate that where I've been, we haven't had shortages. I know some people have, particularly at the start, so I think I was quite fortunate then. I think it was more just a question of getting used to it, and particularly in terms of trying to adapt stuff that a lot of the people I work, well, pretty much all the people I work with have learning disabilities, and so that can create its own unique challenges in terms of if they've got used to seeing you without PPE and then you're in PPE, are you the same person? Can they visualize you the same way? So there's a few communication issues in terms of you can't necessarily lip read that easily and stuff, different things they might have been picking up on. But I think mostly it was just a question of getting used to wearing it. So I think I was quite lucky in that sense. I think I've had to wear less dramatic PPE than a lot of us. So I was quite lucky in that sense. It was more kind of masks and aprons and stuff like that, rather than kind of full on kind of kit through.
Sure, but I'm glad you got what you needed. Yeah, the communication issues that come up are huge, aren't they? When we're wearing PPE in all different parts of healthcare, no matter where you work. Yeah. So when did you realise that COVID risks were higher for certain groups? So Jess mentioned BAME groups. And what impact did these inequalities have? You might have a different perspective on this, perhaps.
Yeah, so I think randomly the first time I probably thought about it was quite near the start, where we were having to fill in a personal risk assessment for COVID for the trusts, and I've had to do it for both trusts, and both of the trusts have mentioned that people from the BAME community are at higher risks, and as well as other people with certain health conditions. And then from my work point of view, unfortunately, people with a learning disability are very much a subcategory that could come into that, unfortunately. Public Health England reckons that I think they're about 8 times as likely to be negatively affected by COVID, and there were huge range of reasons for that, from kind of just the practicalities of them not necessarily being able to comply with the rules, where them not understanding the necessity of wearing PPE or the risks, to them having to have different people coming into their homes, but unfortunately also potentially kind of the value placed on them, in terms of, I know that initially the NICE guidance had suggested that people with a learning disability should kind of automatically be put right at the kind of top of the most vulnerable people, in terms of not really being people that it was worth necessarily putting all the effort into, even if it wasn't necessarily spelt out that literally. That was definitely the implication when it came to kind of like, you know, if you were making a decision for a ventilator and tough things like that, that particularly in the first wave, that was an issue. So yeah, I think that would be the main thing. And then just in terms of, you know, helping people access the things they need, in terms of when we came to the vaccine, my patient group weren't kind of prioritised. So even though they were potentially more at risk, lots of the people I work with are quite young, so potentially from a kind of age ranking system would only be qualifying for the vaccine kind of in the last few months, really. Whereas in terms of their risk category, we probably thought they should be up there with, maybe, you know, kind of up there with the people in the care homes, and they're kind of more near the start. So and that was a bit weird, kind of maybe that kind of, you know, I was lucky enough to be fully vaccinated before a lot of my patients, which was nice for me and to be safer, but did feel a bit weird at times.
Yeah, did you have to advocate for your patients a lot then during that,
Yeah,
even more than usual during?
I think so. I mean, just in terms of making sure that they, you know, were getting the vaccine, that they were having the health check. I think a lot of the times we're doing that anyway, but I think the pandemic just puts a stress on things that maybe, you know, even with the best intentions, people would normally be willing to make a reasonable adjustment or something like that necessary to make somebody come in. Because, for example, a lot of the patients were really scared about the idea of having the vaccination, they're scared of needles, and maybe under better circumstances, we will be able to patiently kind of do step by step by step. But with the demand, it's not always that easy. So I think, yeah, there has definitely been a lot of advocating, even with people's best intentions, really.
Really interesting. Thank you for your reflections. It's not learning disability nursing is not something I hear about very often, so it's a really interesting perspective. Thank you. So what forms of support were put in place for you?
Yeah, I think similar to Kate, I think I've really benefited from talking to friends and peers. In terms of what's trusted, in fairness to them, they did try quite hard. They've put on a daily sort of Teams wellbeing meeting that people can log into if they want to, kind of doing a bit of self-care, mindfulness kind of stuff. And if, you know, negative things were happening, we were very much able to debrief. And I think, yeah, just kind of, much as I think, like Kate said, the kind of teamwork of looking out for each other has been really good for that.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the support that the four of us have lent each other alongside the rest of our network.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's been really nice. It's been, and again, really interesting because we all work in so many different areas. It's really interesting to know that people who work in so many different areas have been going through very similar situations and issues. So was there anything that kept you up at night, and what was it, if you're happy to tell us?
Yeah, I think probably a lot less dramatic than Kate. I've been fortunate to have not had to experience that, but I think different things at different times. I think initially concerns about kind of maybe more personal, selfish concerns, in terms of initially concerns about what might happen. Was I going to finish my degree? And then I think around the time that we talked about kind of thinking about my own kind of sense of mortality and well-being, I think being aware that your family is concerned that you're kind of going out there in the pandemic as well. And I think similar to Kate, just not as dramatic, but just kind of thinking about patients when maybe things haven't gone quite as well. So yeah, a few different things really.
Lots of concerns, yeah. And I guess they all change depending on where we were in the pandemic.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Sure, that makes sense. And okay, so your last question. So looking back, what were your key reflections, and what do you think might have been done better, differently?
It's a difficult one, isn't it? I think key reflections are going to be similar to Kate in terms of the importance of kind of self-care, looking out for each other. I think, I'm not sure you can have a reflection on the importance of reflection, but I've certainly done a lot of reflection. And then in terms of things that could have been better, I think it wasn't their fault necessarily, because I don't think they had the information, but I think some communication at the start about where we should as students could have been better. I think that was complicated by the fact that nobody necessarily knew at the start anyway, but that could have been slightly better, I think. And then I think maybe some of the some of the stuff that I know that NICE changed their guidance on people with learning disabilities after they'd had kind of concerns raised by people who work with people with learning disabilities. So I wasn't involved in that consultation process, but I'm guessing that maybe that consultation process could have gone slightly smoother, because they seemed to change their decisions. So maybe they didn't have the information they needed to, I guess.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you. Well, thank you. Some really wonderful interesting reflections there. Thank you so much for being so honest. I feel like I've learned a lot as well. So in the background, Jess has been keenly collating some additional questions for us from our audience. Can I hand over to you, Jess?
Of course you can. Thank you so much. And thank you, Daniel. That was fab to listen to. And thank you for being so open and honest and sharing those experiences. As our audience will have noticed, the lovely Kate has had to nip off, and she's she's in the middle of a run of nights. So thank you so much, Kate. We all appreciate you. But never fear, because we have a little chat going on between us. So Kate has kindly already answered some of the questions. So we're going to read those out on her behalf as well. So here we go. And we've also had some really lovely messages of support too. So please keep the questions and comments coming, and I'll keep on top of them as best I can. So the first question is and this is from Sue, how can we support you and others in the transition towards being a newly registered nurse after your different experiences through COVID over the past 18 months? Confidence and competence is often brought up, and we want to help to retain your skills. So Daniel, I'm going to come to you first, and then I'll share Kate's answer if that's okay.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you for the question. I think I've been very lucky that my phrasing right, my preceptor with me as the preceptee has my manager has been really good in terms of giving me lots of opportunities to talk to her and kind of have conversations about how things were going, and I think that's been really valuable, because I think you don't necessarily gauge how well you're doing. I know I tend to downplay how well I'm doing on things in general, so I think it's been good to go, oh no, you have done that well. I think encouraging me to reflect on things. So I think having the opportunity to talk about things will be fundamental, really, across all forms of nursing, because I can only speak to mine, but I'm guessing the need is pretty similar, really.
Absolutely. Thank you, Daniel. So I'm going to read out Kate's answer as well. She was furiously typing before she left. So her response is, she thinks ongoing psychological support for all aspects of the job definitely helps. Offering regular feedback and teaching sessions, and recognising the importance of that work-life balance as well, and that you cannot live and breathe nursing. So Kendall, before I move on to the next question, the look of fear in her face then, is there anything you want to add, perhaps from a personal perspective, or even through themes that we've had through RCN NRN?
I think both from a personal perspective and also something we hear time and time again on RCN and NRN is that we've missed out lots of in-person networking. So in a similar way to Daniel, who likes regular feedback, maybe from his colleagues that he works with, I would really like to see other newly registered nurses being able to network with each other, because I think we've missed out on any, maybe been moved online, and rightly so, but I think network and compare experiences like we're doing now, we can learn a lot from each other, and you can learn all those little things that you might catch in a small conversation over when you're getting your coffee, like, oh, what do you do when you do this, or who do you speak to about maybe getting some information about this, etc. So I think networking has been really key, which is, I guess, one of the great things about the RCN Newly Registered Nurses Network.
Lovely plug there, Kendall, thank you. So before I move on to the next question, one of our messages of support I'm going to share with everyone is that all of us were in uncharted territory, including those of us very long qualified, and did wonder what had hit us. We all had to support each other and learn rapidly different ways of working and how to support each other at times, minute by minute. So thank you for sharing that. So the second question I've got so a bit different to what we've been talking about, but I think this is an excellent question nonetheless, is what are key things to add in a personal statement when choosing a nursing course? And that question was from Fantasia. So Daniel, I'll go to you first.
Okay, yes, good. I think fundamentally, kind of, I'm guessing there is some reason that you're applying to be on the nursing course. So kind of what is it that's made you want to do that? Are you really interested in working with a particular group of people? If so, why? So I know on mine, I talked about, the experiences I'd had with people with a learning disability. And then, it's difficult, isn't it? But kind of, I think trying to sell yourself is always difficult, certainly for me, in terms of, I do tend to want to downplay, but I'm sure there are lots of great things that you've done, so just trying to find a way to jam as many of them in as possible within the brief, really, which is not always easy.
Yeah, great advice there. And I think there's a lot of transferable skills that aren't necessarily healthcare related.
Absolutely,
that you can chuck in there for sure.
Absolutely.
So Kate has also answered this one as well, and she said to go through job description and person spec. She says use examples from practice and draw links from learning in uni, and sell yourself and your ability to add to a team. So I think Kate was more answering for that next step from student into that early career, that first qualified post. But I think very good advice there as well. Kendall, anything to add?
Yeah, it's funny, I haven't thought about it in such a long time, but I guess nurses can be very modest, so just big yourself up. Like Daniel says, there'll be something that's interesting about you and that you do well, and you should build on that and be proud of it and kind of own that in a personal statement. And I would probably talk about communication and an interest in lifelong learning, because that's what we need to do as nurses, and obviously your interest in people and improvement and caring and just making life better for others, and just be honest about that, because I think that's why we do it, I hope. So be honest and be bold with and really own those things that you're good at, because that's what you need to sell.
Lovely, thank you, Kendall. And I think I would just add, I say this to a lot of people when I do sessions on social media, is share your why for why you went into nursing. And I know Daniel, you touched on this, because people want to hear it, people want to know that reason, and it is unique to you and will make you stand out too. Okay, so I've got another question, and this is for you, Daniel. Have you faced any discrimination due to being a man who's a nurse? If so, how did you deal with this?
I think I've been relatively fortunate. I don't think I've had that much, but I think sometimes you can even put it on yourself. And I know kind of when I was first going into being a student, I felt quite self-conscious that I might be the only guy on the course. As it turned out, there were quite a few of us, but I think you can sometimes put it in yourself that kind of you mentally can think that, oh, that's, you know, an unusual environment to be in. I think in terms of, I think also kind of sometimes people can be a bit strange about people doing learning disability nursing, but I think just, you know, try and kind of show that, you know, you can do what you do well, really. I think I've not tended, you know, it doesn't really, you know, matter who you are as long as you're doing a good job. So I think, you know, if you're coming across it, then, you know, kind of maybe going, oh, that's a bit strange, but or calling out to it, but it depends on the context, doesn't it? But I think just mainly try and, you know, show that you can do what you can do well, which hopefully should answer any concerns on that. But I think I've been quite lucky not to have too many people shine on me really. I know some people haven't had it worse in that area.
Thank you for being so open and honest about that, Daniel. So next up, I've just got another message of support, which I'd like to share. So I just wanted to say, wow, listening to these experiences and how amazing both Kate and Daniel has been. Thank you so much. Yeah, huge thank you. So another question we have is, what advice would you give current nursing students or people thinking about going into nursing? So Kendall, I'm going to come to you first on this one.
So current nursing students, ask all the questions that pop into your head. Don't hold back, because you'll regret not asking them once you're qualified, and continue to ask those questions actually once you're qualified, because like I mentioned before, nursing is a career of lifelong learning. So don't be afraid if you don't know how to do something. It happens to everyone and at different stages, so just ask lots and lots of questions, and also find your team and where you want to work. We encounter a lot of people within the newly registered nurses network who weren't happy in their first team for whatever reason, or their first area of work, and they take the really bold decision to move. And it was a really hard decision and they never regret it, because nursing is so diverse, and if one type of nursing is not working for you, your skills will be really valuable somewhere else, and life's too short to do something that you're not really happy doing, and you'll add a lot more value if you're somewhere where you're happy and doing a type of work that suits you better. So just if you're struggling, just if it's right for you, decide to make a change, because I've seen that makes such a difference to people's work lives, but also their overall well-being and happiness.
Oh my goodness, what golden nuggets. Thank you, Kendall. But completely agree. You know, we'd rather have happy nurses than either miserable nurses staying where they are, or people leaving the profession full stop. And, you know, we are real on the newly registered nurses network, and we do hear from people saying, you know what, I think I'm just not going to bother revalidating after this round, and it makes us really sad. So we try and help them to find, you know, their path. It doesn't have to be what is perceived as the traditional route within nursing. We just want these people to stay in the profession and contribute in whichever way makes them happy as well. So Daniel, do you have any advice to add?
I'll try. I think similar in terms of it's important to ask questions and different experiences, isn't it? I think if you may be even thinking about applying for nursing, I would say kind of look into the different types of nursing. It's surprising how many people who I meet and or work with, and they didn't know that the sort of thing I do was a job or a thing, but they're quite interested in it. So, you know, it might be for you. So there's a broad range of things you can do. And then, yeah, just ask lots of questions, try different areas. Yeah, and like we said, if there's an area that you don't like, there's probably one that you do. So
lovely, thank you so much. So some words of gratitude. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing your advice and experiences. I'm very grateful for what you do. God bless. Thank you. And thank you. So I'm going to ask some more questions, but please keep them coming to me in the chat function. That would be fab. So thinking back, Daniel, to what you were saying about the impact of the pandemic on your service users, on patients, clients, and Kendall, have a think about this from your perspective as well. But what do you think have been the wider effects on patient care during the pandemic?
I think that it's kind of different things. I think for people who, a lot of the people I work with are effectively lifelong patients in a way. You know, they're always going to have needs of support. I think for them, there's been impacts in terms of greater health risks, but also challenges in terms of changes to their routine, that there were lots of activities and support networks that they used to be able to access and hopefully soon will be able to access again as stuff opens up more, but that's been shut off and has been very damaging. I think there are lots of patients who've been negatively impacted, maybe that there's been maybe delays in treatment for things in terms of waiting lists and times, or just people feeling confident enough to access primary care in terms of finding out about things. And then, yeah, generally just the kind of increased, you know, for all of the people I work with, the, you know, increased health risks just with COVID, which I'm sure is the same for a great many, if not all, patient groups.
Thanks, Daniel. And Kendall, what about you?
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more with what Daniel said, really. In addition, I guess we spoke about communication earlier, and I think communication at all levels during care has been negatively affected, which could have some consequences further down the line. And I think I'm quite concerned about people's loneliness and mental health after long periods of isolation, so in the general public, but then also the mental health of our colleagues, really. Like some of Kayte's stories are really powerful in particular. Yeah, and I know have quite a few colleagues who work in critical care who they need some extra care in the months and years going forward, because I'd be quite concerned about their mental health going forward, because they've been through such a lot.
Thanks both so much. Okay, so what I'm going to do next is I'm going to quiz Kendall a bit on her experiences. Turn it round on the host. We can do that, right? We'll just run with it. So, Kendall, can you share with us, what was your very first memory of COVID? How did you first hear about it? And when did you realise it was a pandemic?
I'm glad I've known these questions for so long, but I haven't actually put any thought into my own answers at all. So I guess, Jess, we were on the students committee together when COVID was kicking off, really. And so I guess my first, obviously it was picking up in the media and we were seeing it in practice, but I would say that it first was on my radar when we were dealing with it as a students committee, and we basically were living and breathing all of the kind of planning about bringing students into the workforce. And I think that's when it became a pretty big deal. And we obviously weren't planning it ourselves, but we were advising those who were just making the decisions about bringing students into the workforce as the RCN Students Committee. So I guess probably then, because well, I got about 1,000 messages a day from the Students Committee. And
it was a bit of an intense time.
Pretty intense. Yeah, but also I guess also like providing the student voice on those issues, but also trying to support students at the same time, because we were then students. And I know you set up a fantastic webinar series, Jess, that I think was really helpful to a lot of students, and we were on social media a lot. So I think that's probably my first some of my first memories of COVID.
You know what, I think I'd agree with you on that. And I think for the record, it's worth noting that when Sir Simon Stevens announced it at that conference, none of us knew that was happening. We had certainly not advised prior to that. It was afterwards, wasn't it? And I can remember where I was at work at university, and the BBC News Blast came up, final year nursing students to join the workforce to help with the response to COVID, and I burst into tears. I didn't know how else to react to that, because it was just that sense of unknown, wasn't it? But yeah, thank you, Kendall, for sharing that and reminding me of what it was like back then. It feels like a million years ago now. So can you tell us, Kendall, what was your role within the COVID response?
So I opted into the extended paid clinical placement, which is what we were just talking about. And I was at Bournemouth University at the time. So I worked in Bournemouth Hospital, and I opted in, and I had an honorary contract because I'm in the military, so I wasn't able to opt in the same way as other people, but I basically did the same job without getting paid by the hospital. I worked within critical care. And so I was basically a runner, and I also, where appropriate, I would learn, but I would also kind of do all of the additional jobs to help out around critical care. And it was a really incredible learning experience, and it was also a pretty emotional time, to be honest. It was just pretty, the thing that hit me then was just patients, family members not being able to see patients. That was the overriding kind of issue and memory about my time working within critical care within Bournemouth. And yeah, we had some tough patient cases, which for me was really really new. I hadn't really worked in many critical areas before, so that was really new for me, but a really interesting learning experience, and something that I'm quite proud to have contributed to, because it's well, help the nation. I'm in the army, I like doing that. And then moving on, I got posted to Portsmouth because I'm in the army, and I have been working in the acute medical unit, surgical high care unit, and now in the emergency department within Portsmouth as part of a rotational preceptorship programme, which has been excellent. And so my role has been varied and really interesting. And sometimes in AMU we saw a lot of COVID, and in surgical high care not any. So it's been really varied, to be honest, as a registered nurse.
No, thank you so much for sharing that, Kendall. I mean, normally, pandemic aside, a rotational post as a newly registered nurse is, for some, quite desirable. Do you think that COVID has had an impact on that rotational post at all?
No, it hasn't. Like, obviously it's affected kind of how we've practiced, because everything has been different down to PPE and how we do business really in hospitals. But no, I was really lucky in that I was able to rotate all the times I was initially supposed to, and I think I'm almost certainly a better nurse after having done those rotations, because as a student nurse I really didn't get the type of exposure to the types of areas of nursing that I wanted to, and that I felt like I needed to as an army nurse. So I am really thankful for the different experiences and the different teams I've worked within, which have all been really incredible teams. So yeah, I think it's been really valuable learning as an adult nurse in those areas, but also learning about teams and learning about what I'm good at and where I might like to be in the future.
Wonderful, thank you so much. I'm going to reflect back on you, if I may, rather than you putting me on the spot. But my experience in the first wave was definitely different, I think. So we had the choice, didn't we? Well, we had an element of choice about where we could go on those paid placements. So I'm now a registered adult and mental health nurse, so I've got the 2 registrations. So I could have gone to a physical health setting, but I actually opted to go to a mental health setting, just because that's where I felt I could make more of a contribution, as we were being paid, and you know, the supervision element wasn't going to be there as much. It's going to be a bit hit and miss. So looking back, I went to a crisis team in the community, and I can just remember when we did do some home visits, not a lot. We were trying to give people in mental health crisis support on the telephone. But for the home visits we could do, just how empty the streets were. And on the news, there were all of the images were from intensive care and what was going on in the hospitals, quite rightly. But, you know, alongside that, what was going on out in the community were, you know, thousands of staff trying to keep patients safe and well in the community as well, be it with their physical health, their mental health. And yeah, it was an interesting time, really, because you were contributing, you were helping, but it just wasn't, you know, the first thing that people thought when they thought nursing in a pandemic. It was definitely a different story. And to the point where, you know, we know there was issues with access to PPE and things like that. And we were literally, in our teams, we had to sign out our antibacterial gel and things like that, because there just wasn't enough. And they had to decanter it into little pots so all of the teams could at least have something. At one point there were no face masks for us as well. So yeah, I remember turning up thinking, oh my goodness, what have I put myself in for? But yeah. So yeah. Kendall, back to you.
You made me think of, it was an interesting reflection also about the deserted streets. It's so funny, well, not funny actually, it's very strange. The commutes to work were so weird, weren't they? In the well, normally in the dark, but yeah, with no one on the streets. I used to cycle to the hospital when I was a student in Bournemouth, and it's just so strange that no one's on the road.
Absolutely. The only times in my life that I was in the Mersey tunnel, which is installed by me across the River Mersey, and was the only person in a tunnel, and I was the only person that I could see him on either carriageway on one of the motorways by me, which was really, really odd. And probably will never happen again.
No, it was the same on the M27. I remember just driving up it and there'd literally not being another car on my way, and the signs on the motorway just like stay home. I can't even remember what they were saying now, but you know, on Boris's little desk thing, it was that saying was on the motorway signs.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my
you find yourself wondering, have I missed a closed sign somewhere? Am I?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was very, very strange times. But then when I joined the register, again, I opted to have a community mental health, but for older persons role. And it was just trying to, again, keep the patients that I was supporting. I wanted to keep them out of hospital because, you know, they were older, they hadn't received vaccinations yet. And it was that balancing act between, okay, how can I support you remotely to keep you safe, but also you need to go in and see these people and support them to be able to keep them safe and well as well. So yeah, that balancing act for community mental health nurses, and it does continue now as well. So I take my hat off to all of you in all different settings. So Kendall, can I ask you another question? Is
Please
that okay? Oh, thank you so much. So what forms of support were put in place for you in your workplace, in your setting? What did that look like?
So I'll talk about since I've been registered. So I posted to an army unit in Portsmouth, Joint Hospital Group South, and we work within Portsmouth Hospital. So we work within lots of different departments, normally those you would associate with military nursing. So we're quite dispersed, which can be really tough to ensure that we get support from our military chain of command. So we obviously get support from the civilian NHS teams that we work within, who are all incredible. But it's been really tough ensuring that we get the military support that we're used to, because actually it's a lifestyle that we've bought into, and that we're used to having military people around us all the time. Like we live with each other, we deploy with each other, and we work with each other. So it's been really strange that we haven't had that face-to-face contact that we would normally have, and perhaps even stranger for us as military people, maybe, I don't know. But my unit have been really great. We've had online clinical supervision, which has been really good. It's been a really nice outlet to be able to Jess is smiling, she's a little bit obsessed with clinical supervision, which has been really good. We've had like quite small group clinical supervision, been able to discuss things that have been happening in practice, questions that we have as new registrants. They've been clinical supervision within small groups of other new registrants, which has been really nice. I do miss not being able to have those face-to-face conversations, because I do think you're able to kind of get a bit more out of them when they're face to face, but they have been really good. And as the pandemic has drawn down, we've been doing a lot more activities together, a lot more physical training and other training that we've been able to do in smaller groups face to face, which has been really good, because alongside the kind of the training that we might be doing, or the phys that we're doing, we'll be able to talk to each other about our problems and how things that have happened over the last year. And I've had discussions with people who have worked in different parts of the hospital than me, that have been just really useful for both of us, for me to appreciate what they've been through, and for them to get off their chest what they've been doing, because it's good to talk, isn't it?
It is good to talk, and I'm so pleased that you brought up clinical supervision, and I will do a cheeky plug now for the RCN forums, because they are all working incredibly hard on a collaborative piece of work for a literature review in regards to clinical supervision, and are all contributing to, hopefully, definitely at some point in the future, all nurses being able to receive regular, true clinical supervision. So, you know, we talk about activism within the RCN, and it's not always waving flags, as fun as that is. If you want to get involved in things like that, then you should certainly get in touch with the forums and see how you can get involved with moving those kind of agendas forward. And that actually brings me on nicely to another one of the messages in the chat that we've received. So not so much a question, but a comment. So it says, ironically, sadly, given the pandemic, no one should have any problems selecting items for their reflective accounts, nor for feedback from others. Suggestion is to make sure you've already started your folder and know what you need to do for revalidation. Oh my goodness. It is never too early to start collecting your evidence, and the pandemic may have shoved your thoughts and planning away from the lovely revalidation issue. Start now so you're ready instead of rushing it. And I would definitely echo that. I mean, I know I'm only getting to 1 year registered, but I've put some time in my diary to actually look back on the past year and see what I can use as that for my revalidation. So, Kendall, I'm going to ask you probably one more question, I think, before we wrap it up, unless there are any other last minute questions come in. I know I've put you on the spot slightly. So, Kendall, looking back, can you share your key reflections? What went well? Could anything have been done differently?
Personally, my key reflections have been that I really benefited from opting in, and mostly because I got to work in an area that I really wanted some experience in, which has been really good, critical care. And I guess my overall key reflection is that I am just really proud to be a nurse. Is that really cliche? It's just, I hear stories like those that we've had tonight, and I just think nurses are incredible. It makes me want to cry a bit. And so I think we should just all be really proud of what we've achieved and how we've contributed in whatever way we have contributed over the last 18 months to 2 years, because nursing is incredible, and that's probably my main reflection.
Thank you so much, Kendall. So before I hand back to Sarah, I'd just like to thank Kate, Daniel, Kendall. Thank you so much for sharing your reflections, sharing your stories, sharing your why. And I hope our audience this evening have enjoyed it, and anyone watching it in the future. Of course, we need to thank the wonderful RCN Libraries team. I say this a lot on Twitter, but they are absolute babes, and they put on such good events and resources that they have. It's just fab. So if you don't follow them, you definitely should. You can, talking about following, you can catch the RCN Newly Registered Nurses Network on social media. So we're just at RCN NRN, and we can share those links if that's helpful. There is an evaluation. Oh, I can see it now, winging its way to you, a survey in the chat. So we would really appreciate it if you could just take a quick minute to complete that. But yeah, thank you so much, RCN Libraries, for helping us document the experience of early career nurses and seeing how important it is to share that story as well.